Hey everyone, welcome back to Bill's Retro Gaming Show. So today's video is going to be the start in a new series where I am going to be talking about some wish list, want list cabs that I would love to see come out from Arcade1Up. So my plan is to do a series of these videos kind of focusing on different genres or different companies and things like that. Now, some of these I think are definitely things that Arcade1Up could do, should do, will do in the future. Some of these are more, wish list, want list, things that I think maybe we'll see or maybe in some form, if not exactly the form that I'm going to talk about. And some of these are definitely going to be more in the pipe dream, total wish list category of things that either we will never see, or if we do, they're going to be very specialized cabinets. Think Terminator. That was a cab that came out that was one game on it, very specific game, very specific play mechanic with the two guns. Things of that nature that I'm not saying that Arcade1Up won't do, but if they did, maybe there'd be a very limited market for it, or maybe the licensing would be such that they'd have to do it in that particular way, like they did with the T2 cab. But again, that's for future videos. Today's video I'm going to start with is one that I think maybe falls into that second category. It's kind of a want-wish one that I think maybe we'll see something like this in the future, if not necessarily this exact cab that I'm going to talk about. And there's a couple of reasons why I think that would be, and I'll explain those as we go along. So we all know Arcade1Up has been making what they call these legacy cabs lately. You've got, they've just announced at CES this year 3 new ones, and I say new because really they're just revamped versions of ones that they've already released with some updated features, some added games and things like that. You've got the Atari Legacy, which focuses on a button trackball spinner kind of play mechanic and is focused on Atari released games. You've got the Midway Legacy, which is set up as a 2-player fighter type where Mortal Kombat is the main feature on it, along with other Midway games on the cabinet. And then you've got the Namco Bandai ones, which are focused on Pac-Man or Ms. Pac-Man, and then again related Namco games. This one is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to call this one the Marvel Legacy cab. Now hear me out on this one, okay? Arcade1Up has actually already produced several cabs that feature Marvel superhero game. You've got the Marvel Superheroes arcade cabinet, which had Marvel Superheroes. It had X-Men Children of the Atom, and it had the Punisher. You had the X-Men vs. Street Fighter machine. And that one featured X-Men Children of the Atom, X-Men vs. Street Fighter, Marvel vs. Capcom, and X-Men Mutant Apocalypse, which was more of a console game than an actual arcade game. And then you had the Marvel vs. Capcom machine, which had Marvel Superheroes, Marvel vs. Street Fighter, X-Men vs. Street Fighter, Marvel vs. Capcom, and Marvel War of the Gems, again, another console one. And I believe this one was a special cab that was sold by Arcade1Up partners. I don't think you can actually get this one directly from Arcade1Up, but it is another Marvel-themed cab that they produced. And then, of course, finally, you had the 4-player X-Men machine, which featured the 4-player X-Men game, 4-player Captain America and the Avengers game, and Avengers Galactic Storm, which was a 2-player fighter game. I know Arcade1Up already has a relationship with Marvel when it comes to this, and certainly with the publishers of those games, which was primarily Capcom for most of the fighter games, Konami for the X-Men 4-player game, and Data East for the Captain America and the Avengers game. So now, here's what I'm proposing. And again, I think we might see something along these lines, but maybe not in exactly the way that I'm going to bring it up. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And I'm going to, kind of talk about some of the pros and cons of why I think it might or might not happen. So yeah, I'm calling this the Marvel Legacy because really what it is, it's a focus on all of the Marvel arcade games that are out there. And now all the ones I'm going to mention, Arcade1Up has already produced cabs with these games on them, except for 2. And I think when or if they do this, the marquee title should be Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which is one of the games they have not produced yet. So Marvel vs. Capcom 2 should be the marquee title on the cabinet that I am suggesting. Again, because I think it's one that they haven't done yet. I think it's one that people want to see. And I think it's one they could definitely do since they've already done Marvel vs. Capcom. Now let me go over the other titles that I would love to see on this cab. Again, we'll start with Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Give us Marvel vs. Capcom. X-Men, Children of the Atom. Marvel Superheroes. X-Men vs. Street Fighter. Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter. And The Punisher. Now, those are all games that they've already produced. They're all fighter games except for The Punisher, which is a side-scrolling beat-em-up game. And they're all produced by Capcom. So far, so good. Here's where I think I'm going to go more into the pipe dream wish list avenue that may or may not make this possible. And I'm going to say, while you're at it, throw on a 2-player version of the Konami X-Men game. A 2-player version of the Data East Captain America and the Avengers game. Put Avengers Galactic Storm on there. Again, Data East, fighter game. And give us Spider-Man the video game by Sega. Spider-Man the arcade game is another one that we haven't seen yet from Arcade1Up. Be a great one to add to a cabinet like this. Again, another 4-player side-scrolling beat-em-up game, similar to X-Men, similar to Captain America and the Avengers. Yeah, you could do it on a 2-player cab with 2 players. We know they already have a relationship with Sega, having released the Golden Axe machine. But I would love to see one cabinet with all of these games on it. Again, 3 of these games, X-Men, Captain America and the Avengers, and Spider-Man the video game, are 4-player beat-em-ups that I'm proposing to put on a 2-player cab because most of the games are 2-player games. Now, here's why I don't think this is so out of the realm. Look at the Midway Legacy. Midway Legacy has Gauntlet on it, typically a 4-player game. It's got Rampage on it, 3-player game. So it's not out of the question for them to put games onto cabinets that typically have more players available to it and leave it in a 2-player form. And they could do that with a cabinet like this and give us something that condenses all of the Marvel superhero games into one cabinet. That's 11 games that I've mentioned. So while you're at it, throw in one of those other games from one of the other cabinets. War of the Gems, X-Men Mutant Apocalypse. Maybe Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Again, now I don't believe that was ever actually released into the arcades. I think that came about with like the PS2 and the Dreamcast era. They were typically console games. But look, if you're going to throw console games on here anyway, give us a cabinet with Marvel vs. Capcom 2, 3, and Marvel vs. Capcom on it. Why not? So what makes a cabinet like this difficult for Arcade1Up to produce? Well, probably the number one thing is the number of companies involved in making these games. You've got really 4 different companies who have made these games over the years. Primarily Capcom. Then you've got Konami for the X-Men 2-player. You've got Data East for Captain America and the Avengers and Avengers Galactic Storm. And then you've got Sega for the Spider-Man game. Now, is it out of the question for them to produce a cabinet that has games from multiple publishers on it? No, look at the X-Men cabinet. The X-Men cabinet had the X-Men game from Konami and then the 2 games from Data East. So it's not that they couldn't do it. It's just a question of, can they work out the logistics and the licensing with those publishers to produce those games on one cabinet? Now, I don't think the licensing as far as Marvel goes is a problem because they've already done most of the games on here. Like I said, the only ones that haven't been produced, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which I'm sure is coming in some capacity, and the Spider-Man Sega game. which I would love to see on a cabinet. Fun game, would go great with these, would love to see it. Could they work out a deal? Maybe. Will they? Who knows? Again, you're talking about basically taking 4 cabs that they have out there that they're selling and putting them into one. Is that necessarily the right thing for Arcade1Up to do from a business standpoint? Well, maybe, because eventually they're going to stop producing those other ones and they're going to go out into the marketplace and they're going to be like every other older Arcade1Up cab. You're going to have to find them secondhand and whatever. So to refresh those by producing one cab that has all of them on there, I think would sell like gangbusters. I think there's a ton of people who love these games, who are huge Marvel Comics fans, who would buy this just to have all those Marvel Comics games in one cab. Now, downside of having 3 games on here that should be 4-player games is 2-player games. Yeah, so again, that's where, the pluses and minuses come in. That's where the balance comes in. But that's why I referenced the Midway cab with Rampage and with Gauntlet that are typically multiplayer games condensed to 2 players on those cabs. So again, I don't think it's out of the realm, or it's certainly not something that Arcade1Up wouldn't or couldn't do. So let's take it a step further. Because like I said, with the multiple publishers on here, I don't know if we'll ever see a cab like this. I would love to. It's definitely a wish list. It's definitely one I would snatch up if it came out. So let's take it back a step and let's look at something else they could maybe do similar. Okay, and we'd lose some of the ones on here, some of the ones that I would love to see. I'd love to have X-Men in some capacity. I may spring for the 4-player one at some point, but even to have it on here in a 2-player capacity, I probably wouldn't get both. I'd love to see, again, Spider-Man, because we haven't seen that on a cab yet. But let's take those off of here. Let's take the Konami. Let's take the Data East. Let's take the Sega games off. Let's stick with just the Capcom games. Let's stick with Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Marvel vs. Capcom, X-Men Children of the Atom, Marvel Superheroes, X-Men versus Street Fighter, Marvel versus Street Fighter, and The Punisher. All Capcom games. Could you do a Marvel Capcom Legacy cab? Absolutely. And I think it would solve the problem of the multiple publishers. It would solve the problem of games on here that are multiplayer beyond 2-player, because all of these are at max 2-player games. So could they do that? Absolutely. Now you're talking about 7 games. Where do you round out the rest? Well, how about this instead? How about you go into other Capcom games that they haven't released yet? Some things that would really go along well with a cab like this. And if I had to pick a non-Marvel game to throw on here, give me Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. I would love to see Cadillacs and Dinosaurs on a cab, and I think it would fit the theme for this so well. Another side-scrolling beat-em-up, another one that's actually kind of based on a comic. It's got that comic booky sci-fi feel to it. I think it would be fantastic on a cab with this. Now, I don't know what the licensing would be involved in a game like this compared to some of the others, but this game would be super fun to go along with a Marvel Capcom Legacy type cab if you can't do all of the other Marvel games that are non-Capcom. Another game that would fit really well with this style, another side-scrolling beat-em-up we haven't seen before. How about Captain Commando? Another Capcom side-scrolling beat-em-up. Again, got that comic booky sci-fi feel to it, would really fit in well with the genre. And we haven't seen it on a cab before. So I think something like this would be perfect. Throw another beat-em-up on there, too. Give us Red Earth. Another one we haven't seen on a cab before. Different kind of fighter. I think it would be super fun to see on a cab like this. And again, another one that goes along with that real sci-fi comic booky feel, I think would fit in with these other games really, really well. So, if you can't give us every Marvel game, give us a Capcom Legacy cab that is Marvel superhero focused with those Marvel superhero games, and throw in some other ones that we haven't seen before, like Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, Captain Commando, Red Earth. Maybe, I know we've seen the Darkstalkers, maybe throw like Vampire Savior on here as a different one. Maybe Bionic Commando as another side-scroller. Maybe Gem Fighters. I know we've seen like the Super Puzzle Fighter Turbo. give us another like puzzle type game on something like this. So yeah, those are my thoughts on a Marvel themed legacy cab that I would love to see come from Arcade1Up. Now, again, do I think that we're going to see it in the way that I mentioned in the beginning with all the different Marvel games from those different publishers? Probably not. Do I think we're going to get a Marvel vs. Capcom 2 cab with some games on it at some point in the future? Yes. Yes, I do. And I would love to see it be a Capcom Legacy style with all of the Capcom fighters, brawlers on it, and then throw in some of those other ones like I mentioned, Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of that one. I would love to see that on there. Bionic Commando would be another great one that we haven't seen before. Stop rehashing all the old ones. I mean, again, the Marvel games, yes, they're a rehash. We've seen most of those, all the ones that I've mentioned already. But while you're at it, give us some games that we haven't seen before. I know everybody's going to be saying, what about Aliens vs. Predator? Yes, I would love Aliens vs. Predator on a cab like this. Now you're going super into the realm of pipe dream just because of the licensing involved with Aliens vs. Predator. That's got to be its own cab. Just like RoboCop would have to be its own cab, just like T2 was its own cab. I'm going to get into ones like that in a future video for sure. Not for this one, okay? I don't see that happening on something like this. But, yeah, I would love to see this. And as a matter of fact, I'll take it a step further, and I'd love to see it in a big blue form factor like the Street Fighter was. That would really be phenomenal. Give me a new big blue, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 as the marquee title, and throw all these other ones on there. And sold in a heartbeat, added to the collection, no doubt. But let me know what you guys think. Throw some comments in. Let me see what games you would like to see on a cabinet like this. Let me know if you think I'm, way off base and there's no way this is ever going to happen, or if you think something similar might happen in the future. What are your thoughts on it? Is it a cab you'd be interested in? If they threw a Marvel Legacy cab out there, are you buying it? So that's it for this video. If you're checking me out for the first time, or if you've watched a few and you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscription bell. Hit the notification bell so that you get notified every time that I put out a new video. Give this video a like. Throw some comments down on there on what you think of my choices for this cab. Share it. And just, help me out here. Help the channel grow, all right? Because I'm enjoying making these videos. I hope you're enjoying watching them, and I'd love to continue to make them. That's it for this time. I will see you again in the future. Take care.